So, okay, in this day and age, not a lot of people can say that the best friend that they have when they're in their mid-40s is a best friend that they found when they were a child. Tell us about how you met Susan, and then give us 3 examples of why your all's friendship, what things that happened along the way that made your all's friendship last this long.
Susan and I met at the age of 11 at Palm Beach Public Junior High School. And we spent those 2 years together in school, in classes together all day, every day. And we're best friends. We just sort of gravitated toward each other, I guess. Our personalities or what have you, just, we hit it off, and it was a very tight-knit group to begin with. And then she and I became especially good friends. But then we were zoned for different high schools, and so we spent 4 years not seeing each other all the time, although we did stay in touch. And then it just so happened, it really was coincidence, that we both ended up at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And so that definitely cemented our lifelong friendship in the sense that, I could see how we might have grown apart had we not gone to college together. After college, I moved back home for a little while. She moved back home for a little while. And then we were both trying to sort of figure out what we wanted to do. And graduate school seemed like the best way of forestalling adulthood a little bit longer. No, but Susan wanted to study journalism because she saw it as a great career that was portable. She had fallen in love with foreign travel and thought that it was something she could do anywhere in the world. And I also loved travel, but I was less practical, I guess, and so I thought, okay, well, I just want to travel, and I want to learn Spanish, so I went and I got my master's in Latin American Studies at the University of Florida. So in graduate school, we got a chance to spend 2 more years as roommates. We had been roommates for part of the time in undergraduate. We were roommates again in Gainesville. And so that, again, just really just galvanized the friendship. We just grew closer and really matured into adults while we were there in Gainesville. So I'm trying to think, what else could I say about it? Susan met her husband John just before she went up to school in Gainesville. So her sort of married life and career began after that. And then I stayed in Gainesville for a while and ended up also going to the College of Journalism and Communications and getting the same, getting a master's degree there also. So we both ended up with master's degrees from the College of Journalism, and I went the PR route primarily, although I did work as a journalist for a couple of years, and she went the journalism route.
Now you guys, the 2 main folks that kind of bring us into the story that have the UF connection are you and George.
Right.
Tell us about how you guys met George.
Susan had volunteered to be an ambassador of sorts for the international students who were arriving to study journalism at the University of Florida. And one of them was George Sikalides, who had arrived from Cyprus, and she helped orient him to the campus and to town. And when a serial killer started going on a rampage that had everyone terrified, it was Labor Day weekend was coming up, and everyone was trying to get out of town. And of course, George and one of the other international students Susan had helped orient, Jenny Rawlinson, they had nowhere to go. They didn't know anyone. They had no friends here other than Susan. So she said, well, why don't you come to Palm Beach with us? My friend Nancy her parents have often provided housing for visitors, and they're very open to that and welcoming, and I'm sure they'd be more than happy to host you. So I met George for the first time, I think in the parking lot of his apartment complex on the way to West Palm Beach or to Palm Beach for the Labor Day weekend. Jenny I had already met because she was staying with us while she looked for housing. So we spent that weekend together, and we became friends and remained friends for the duration of their time in Gainesville. But we really had lost touch with George for, almost 20 years. We hadn't, Cyprus is pretty far away, and we had not stayed in touch very, very well. So it was 20 years later when Susan was trying to find her family in Cyprus. She had only recently learned that that's where her biological father came from. And he had died already before she found out who he was. So he had no children. We couldn't find any next of kin here in the States. And so we started looking in Cyprus, and we thought, first thought I had was, let's find George. And it had been so long, I think, Susan kind of forgot at first that that's where he was. And so I made the suggestion, and she Googled his name, and within a couple of days, they were in conversations, and he had found her relatives.
Tell me what happened when Susan first called you and to tell you that she felt close, or felt like she knew what the diagnosis was going to be.
There was never a phone call where she said, "I think I have ALS," because it started with a remote possibility, and it developed so slowly. All along, I knew the same thing she knew, that if it spread from her left hand or left arm, it was probably ALS. It was most certainly ALS if it spread, based on what the doctors had seen. So I was accompanying her all the way. We saw each other all the time. And so I could observe it just as easily as she could observe it. Stephanie could observe it just as easily as Susan could observe it. John could observe it just as easily. So there was never any time when she had to tell me, "I think it's ALS." When we went to New Orleans together, my husband and I went to New Orleans with Susan and her husband. It was on that trip that I had the realization that there was no other explanation. We all tried to not deny it, because I think we were all realistic about the possibility that that's what it was, but we tried to hold on to the hope that maybe that wasn't what it was. That hope was all we could really hold on to. Because we knew what it would mean if that was the diagnosis. So, there was, to me, the phone call was the very first one when she told me she had these symptoms, and that John had mentioned that he had wondered, or he had asked the doctor, "You don't think it's ALS, do you?" She mentioned ALS to me. I had not yet observed that her left hand was weak. She called me one day and said, "I'm having this strange weakness in my left hand." And John said, "Gosh, I hope it's not ALS." And Susan says she didn't really know what ALS was when he first said those 3 letters. I did, for whatever reason. I worked in medical education for 10 years, maybe that's why. But I think I remember at a young age learning who Lou Gehrig was, and I knew that ALS and Lou Gehrig's disease were one and the same. And I knew what the prognosis was for someone with Lou Gehrig's disease. At least, basically, I understood it. So I was reeling from the moment of that phone call, just with the possibility. But it was a long time before that possibility became something obvious to us all. And by the time she did go to receive her diagnosis, it was a foregone conclusion among all of us.
So tell me about, she says, "Okay, I've been diagnosed, I'm going to do this year, and let's go see the Northern Lights." What was your reaction?
I just was surprised. I didn't know that was something. I thought I knew almost everything there was to know about Susan, and I didn't know that about her, that was something she had wanted to do. And of course, I was more than willing to go anywhere she wanted to go. I mean, I joked about it. I said, I think when we were leaving on the trip, I posted to Facebook something to the effect that, you know, I always told Susan I would follow her to the ends of the earth. I can't believe after all these years she's still testing me. Because we came, you know, pretty close to the Arctic Circle on that trip, and, you know, it was not someplace I had ever imagined myself going, but I didn't hesitate to go. I mean, I just knew that any place I went with Susan, we were going to have a great time no matter what happened. And I was really excited about having the opportunity to go somewhere just with Susan, you know, my best friend. So.
But then the trip didn't end up being, like, so it's interesting because in the book it's almost like, that's one of the first ones, and it's like, okay, I had this goal and we were going to do all this cool thing, and then it didn't end up, and it's almost like that was like a turning point going, okay, the trip, like going to see whatever it is, didn't matter as much as the actual being with the person. Tell us kind of how did that happen, or
Yeah.
kind of that realization that was really the point, was being with the person.
Well, Susan and I, when we left, we knew there was nowhere near any kind of guarantee that we would see the lights. So, you know, I certainly wasn't expecting to see them. I thought, oh gosh, for Susan's sake, it would be wonderful if we did, because if I decided someday that I really wanted to see the Northern Lights, I figured I'd have a lot more chances to do that, to try anyway. And so I knew this was it. You know, for her, this was her one chance. So I wanted them to appear, and I was disappointed for her, I guess, when the first night they didn't appear, the second night they didn't appear, and I remember the third night she said, I don't think I can make it out to the cabin, because you have to stay up late, and you know, she was already tiring, you know, pretty easily. There was a lot of snow on the ground. You know, you had to wear heavy boots, heavy parka. It was an exhausting effort for her just to get to the place where you would go to watch the lights, and then you know, had to wait there all night, almost till 3 in the morning or something. And I said, you have to come. What, you know, I was terrified of the possibility that I would see them and she would be asleep in the hotel room. I couldn't. I made her go pretty much the third night, and you know, and they didn't appear. But I mean, we had been having a wonderful time the whole time. So, you know, I mean, we were never disappointed. I mean, like she said, life ain't perfect. We all know life ain't perfect, you know. But, you know, as I said to her when we got back, it's the journey, not the destination, which she immediately pointed out was a cliche, which it is. But, I mean, it happens to be true. Some things are cliche for a reason. They're very true. And so, I mean, honestly, growing up in South Florida, it would have never occurred to me to go dog sledding. I would have never even known that was something that someone with no background or training or experience in it could just go and do. And it was not hard. It was bitterly cold. And it was incredibly fun. And just, it was like almost an otherworldly experience. We were the only people out that day. And there was a snowmobile with the guide on it that, you know, kind of led us. But when they would get ahead of us, well enough ahead of us into the forest, that we couldn't really hear it anymore because the trees were so thick. You know, if they got far enough ahead of us, you couldn't really hear the snowmobile, and you could, like she says in the book, you could just hear the pat, pat, pat of the feet of the dogs. Susan's book is so life-affirming, and I think the only thing that could possibly be more life-affirming than the experience of reading the book is the experience of living through the book. And, excuse me, I'm sorry. And, a lot of that is just the experience of being with Susan, being around her, but it's not just that. As incredible of an example as she is, the example has been really one of a whole community of people from all phases of Susan's life, childhood to the present. So, childhood friends, colleagues from the Palm Beach Post, college friends, graduate school friends, neighbors, hairdresser, hairdresser's wife. I could go on and on. People doing things for them, landscaping their backyard. A friend of her parents did that. The kindnesses that people have extended to her and to John are just humbling. Just strangers even, just people, the messages she has received from all over the world. It's really been so heartwarming and encouraging that there are people out there like that. So it's bolstered me personally in a way that nothing I've ever experienced has ever done.
Now, we read about Susan in the book, and we've read about her in all the articles and the Today Show and something. Tell us about maybe something about the Susan that is fun or is different than what we might see in the book, or something funny or offbeat or whatever. What is it? You've had a friendship for
35 years.
35 years.
Yeah.
Tell us about the Susan that that might not be seen in the book.
Well, I think Susan did a pretty good job in the book of capturing her sort of mischievous side. And to me, that's, the fun thing about her. In the book, she talked about the April Fool's jokes that, she would play on her husband, and, just silly things she did when we were in junior high that, were among the things that drew me to her, because she just always made me laugh. So I think people who read the book will get a pretty good sense of how fun she is. It's important to her that people understand that the book is funny, and that we've had fun these last couple of years. She doesn't want people to think the book is maudlin or that it's just a tearjerker of a book. So I think the thing, though, that some people may not realize about Susan, just from reading the book, is how thoughtful she is, how generous she is. And this necklace that I'm wearing is one example. Last Christmas, she gave me, her sister Stephanie, her daughter Marina, and her mother, each one of us, this necklace. And the necklaces are all the same, but for one thing. This is the infinity symbol, and each of us got the 2 rings, and one ring has Susan's name engraved on it, but the other has the name of the recipient engraved on it. And forever she's been that way. She puts a lot of thought into gifts, and she gives gifts all the time, and not just to people she's really close to, like us. A friend of mine had a baby, and she'd met the friend, I think maybe twice. But the friend was a single mother, going into it as a single mother, and Susan admired her courage for making the choice that she did to have the baby and to raise the baby on her own. And so she ordered a baby blanket with the baby's name embroidered on it and had it sent to her. And, you know, she does things like that all the time. She is so filled with gratitude. And I admire that. I mean, a lot of people have a tendency to think of, you know, themselves and their family and, you know, think of the people closest to them first, and they may make sure they take care of that close, you know, group, and they may feel grateful. But I mean, Susan's gratitude extends way far out from her. So I think that's something that, you know, people might not know, and that she certainly wouldn't talk about.
Okay, tell us about your college days in Gainesville.
I mean,
Where were you?
grad school?
Yeah, in your grad school days. Where are your haunts? What do you remember about Gainesville? What were your favorite stories about your college?
I'll tell you, this
days
is a
in
funny story
Gainesville?
that's not in the book. Susan and I we actually were roommates for a while with my older brother, who was also getting a master's in Latin American Studies at UF when I was, and Susan was in the journalism program. So Susan and my brother Harold and I were roommates in a house in the Duck Pond neighborhood. And one day, my cousin was visiting. She was actually moving to Gainesville for work, and she was staying with us for a brief period of time looking for a place to live. And while I was out with her, we found this dog, and my cousin was going to adopt it, but then, anyway, Susan and I ended up adopting this dog together, named Alva. And so this dog was wild. It was crazy and not house trained and chewed on everything and ran away a lot. So Susan was forever we were both forever chasing the dog. And one day the dog went under the crawl space of a house down the street, and Susan thought it would be a good idea. She saw a cat in the neighbor's yard, and she picked up the cat because she knew that Alva chased cats, and she dangled it at the edge of the crawl space, trying to draw our dog out. And her plan was to sort of whip the cat away, grab the dog, and let the cat run. Only the owner of the cat saw her doing this little maneuver and said, "Excuse me, what are you doing with my cat?"
Did it work?
I don't remember. I just remember her getting caught trying to use the cat as a bait. But we had a lot of fun in that house. We had some parties. We would invite. I invited students from the Latin American Studies program, and she invited students from the college. And we had a roommate after my brother, and he would invite his friends. And I don't know. We used to go running together. We used to. I'm trying to think. We just always were making each other laugh. We'd go out, to the haunts downtown. I mean, we'd have dinner at Emiliano's. We went to a Two Live Crew concert once. We just we're typical students.
You told me last night that you all went to North Carolina, and you got educated. She did international affairs,
Relations,
and you did
English
or whatever. But you said she wanted to be a journalist at UF.
Right.
Talk about
that. Well, I think neither Susan nor I had a really strong idea of what we wanted to do for our career in college. I mean, I know I didn't. And she knew she wanted to do something. I turned her on to travel, actually. She'll tell you that. I had studied abroad in Brazil and came back and was raving about it. So she ended up studying abroad in Geneva. And then I went to Brazil again. And so we were both interested in travel. And she chose journalism as a career primarily because it was portable. She could practice it overseas, she could practice it at home. So that's why she decided to go to graduate school at the University of Florida and get a master's degree in journalism. So she went there with, the interest and the desire, but really, didn't have the training as a journalist, and that's where she learned. She graduated from there and went into a career in journalism and never looked back. I mean, that was her career, and she was really good at it and won all kinds of awards. But that's where she learned how to be a reporter, and that's where her career began.
Is there anything that has surprised you over the last 2 years?
Let me think. Well, I can tell you I'm not surprised that Susan's book got published and became a bestseller, because I predicted that a long time ago. I mean, as soon as she actually got an agent and got a book deal, I knew that the book was going to be a bestseller. I just knew. I guess it was, a little bit surprising how it all came together, how quickly it came together. The conditions under which she wrote it, and the discipline. I mean, I'm not saying I'm surprised she was disciplined, because I always knew she was. But I'm more amazed than surprised by the discipline that it took for her to sit and tap out that book, literally letter by letter, with her right thumb. John would have to pick her up, place her in the chair, place the phone in her hand. He would get her all situated, and then he would just leave her out there all day long. I mean, of course he would check on her, but I mean, she would sit in that chicky hut all day long writing, day after day after day. And when we took trips, like the trip to Captiva, she would stay back at the rental house while we went to the beach or whatever, and write. So she was experiencing the trip, aspects of it. She went out on the boat when we went out on the boat, but other times she would stay and work on the book. And it would have been really hard for her to do some of the things we were doing, like going to the beach. It would have been almost impossible without a special beach wheelchair like they had at Discovery Cove. So she said to me one day when I came back to the house, and she was sitting on the porch writing on her iPhone, she's actually said to me, "I'm so happy at the way things turned out. Imagine if I were stuck here without a book to write."
Going forward, looking out in the next 10 years, the what she did with the kids and Marina and the dress and Wesley and the dolphins and such.
Mm-hmm.
You, as a best friend, as somebody who's been so part of all this, look out. What do you see as your kind of responsibility to her as the kids grow older? Well, I remember after the mango party, the famous mango party that's described in the book, Susan was in bed. The kids had been sent to friends' houses to spend the night, and John and I were the only ones up in the house. And I remember telling him that I'll still be here. Well, what happened was he said, "This is the way it's going to be." The house was so quiet, and he was just, except for me, he was alone, at that moment, and he said, "This is the way it's going to be." And I said, "I'll still be here." And, he said, "I know." He said I was one of the things that he knew he could count on. Stephanie's definitely huge in that regard. She has made a commitment that, she will help raise the kids and that she'll be part of their lives. And of course we know that, Susan's hope is that John will meet someone and remarry. So there may be, someone else who will be part of that picture too, But whatever, is needed will be there. And
I want to, fulfill a promise with, along with Stephanie to take the kids to Cyprus. She especially wants Aubrey to go there because he's the one who looks so much like her biological father and who sort of helped easily convince her family there that she was indeed his, Panos' daughter. So, I'm part of a big circle of friends and family now, of Susan's friends and family, who I'm sure will, many of whom will continue to be a support for John and the kids. And Susan's kids are, before even, well before Susan was sick, even though I had family in West Palm Beach, when we would come to visit, we would stay with Susan and her family. And there was a period of time when my kids really believed, not because I had led them to believe this, but they thought that Susan's kids were their cousins because they had other cousins, and that to them was what it meant to have cousins. And so, I hope that her kids also grew up thinking of me as an aunt. And I think they do feel very comfortable with me. So, I really intend to help support them as much as I can.
What have I not asked you?
When we were at dinner the last night, we were in Cyprus in 2010. He phrased it so well, so I'm trying to do, and it was concise. But
It's okay, we don't want your words.
all right. Well, it's just amazing to think that really Gainesville's darkest hour, it has to be in history, the student murders, Danny Rawling, brought us together, me, Susan, and George, in an effort to get out of town. We came together to Palm Beach and we formed this friendship that 20 years later proved key to Susan discovering her biological roots in Cyprus. And just the serendipity of that is mind-blowing. And he's not just a guy from Cyprus. He's an amazing, funny, helpful, warm guy who went to great lengths, set his life aside basically for a week, did extensive research into Susan's family in Cyprus, contacted them all, and hosted us when we went there for that week. And it's something that Susan and I will both be eternally grateful for. So it was just an amazing stroke of serendipity. And to have him back here in Florida now is just, it's wonderful. It's come full circle, and I'm so happy and grateful that we met him.